Thank you, Mel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Honestly, it's funny, we were talking right before the show started. I'm literally just a mom of three kids who saw some stuff going on in our school district, specifically that a program was coming into our children's school. And I just started doing some research. I like doing research. I'm a curious person, and discovered that this program, which was social emotional learning, there was way more to it than met the eye. On the surface, it seemed like a really kind of innocuous program. Oh, we're going to teach kids social emotional skills.
Right.
But then as I started digging deeper, it was, oh my gosh, the funding's coming from all of these nefarious organizations. Oh my gosh, this is from the UN and they want kids to be global citizens and they're collecting data on them. So it just became this much bigger animal. And so I've been spending the last 3 or 4 years warning people about that and other cognitive liberty destroying programs across the United States and globally. Well, it's interesting. So I had went to the webpage of the program that was going to come into the school, which was Second Step. And right off the bat, I had alarm bells because they had a page about anti-racial and anti-bias training. And I knew enough about critical race theory and kind of the concepts behind it that all the links that were on that page basically espoused critical race theory concepts. And it talked about how the organization CASEL, CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, they're the org that basically sets the 5 standards for all SEL programs across the nation, that they were now doing this thing called transformative SEL. And I was like, well, what's that? And of course, when I went to go look at that, it's all about using these words like empathy and identity and belonging and all these different ways to talk about who the kids are and what they believe, to introduce certain critical theories to them. So I'll give you an example.
Great.
Right. In the Second Step program, and this is where things really kind of unraveled for our community here. As a friend and I went in to look at this program, we put out this 20-page document documenting all the things that we found in there.
Wow.
We had captured some videos, thankfully, that Second Step do not want out there. But we're covered under Fair Use Act, and we use that. And for instance, they would have a video talking about anti-bullying, right? And they have a boy in full makeup talking about how he's being bullied at school. But the concept isn't just, we need to be kind to other people who look different than us, who maybe make different choices than us. They use empathy and perspective taking as a tool to say, oh no, guess what? The golden rule, the way they teach it in Second Step, is not do unto others as you would have them do unto you. They say, consider how someone else wants to be treated and then treat them that way. So you have to completely subsume your individual thoughts about whether or not there's 2 genders or 500 genders, or sex, I should say, because there really is no such thing as gender. It's sex. It's your XY or XX program. To then say, oh, because that person wants to be called by a different pronoun, that person believes that they're a third, sex or whatever it is.
Right.
That I need to be okay with that. I need to participate in that. I need to make them feel good. And this is what social emotional learning does with critical race theory, with queer theory, with all of it. And beyond that, they teach kids that they're global citizens, which doesn't exist, right? You cannot be a global citizen without a global sovereign, which the United Nations wants to become. No, and I think it's an excellent point you make. I was lucky enough to share what I knew with Abigail Schreier before she put out her book, Bad Therapy.
Right.
And I put her in touch with this mother that shared the story with me. And basically her 4th grader was in one of these SEL lessons. And a lot of times what they do is they open up with these circle times and have these kind of
You're
questions.
also shamed on top of it if you don't go along with it. It's kind of like forcing you so everyone can see you and they're like, that's the one, that's the bad problem in the group. Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. Well, and when you do things like have kids answer questions in a group, like what makes you sad, right? You can have a conglomerate of responses, right? From, oh my gosh, Susie didn't play with me at lunch and now I'm mad about that and she's not treating me well and that makes me feel sad, to I had a grandparent die or a parent die even. And this one kid opens up with, my parents are divorced and now my mom's drinking and seeing other people. And as you know, Mel, like vulnerability breeds vulnerability, especially among young kids. And so these kids around him started sharing even deeper things too. And by the end of the circle time, they're supposed to just having an icebreaker. All of these kids in this group are crying. And the teacher, because she's a math teacher and not a trained psychologist, and she's practicing group therapy without a license, was like, well, I'm really sorry you're going through that, but we got to get back to math. And now this kid who's completely offended, his emotions are completely offended, he's experiencing trauma, reliving trauma, is now going to try to go out the rest of his day and learn. And you don't think that that creates more of a mental health crisis? I also think because kids are fundamental beliefs are being challenged through the critical race and critical queer theory. When you start saying, oh, your parents, and that's one of the things that Second Step did. They say, your parents don't understand you. You know, they don't understand what you're going through. You know, you're living in a different generation and they just don't get it.
Right.
And so when you try to sever that relationship between parent and child, that causes more distress because that's so much tied to the kid's identity. And I actually think that SEL has caused more mental health than solved anything. No, and you know, it's funny, I was on a different program and this host asked me, you know, but what are we going to do about the mental health crisis? And I said to him, I'm like, why do we always think that the government's going to solve our health problem? I know. You know, I think that what's not being brought into the picture is like, let's talk about having healthy family relationships. What does that look like? You know, like, let's talk about getting kids having a healthy balance, not being on screens all the time. I think that there are multiple other things we should be talking about than like, how are we going to teach kids how to be empathetic or to deal with their mental problems at school? I think that goes beyond the role of the school and usurps the role of the parent in that child relationship. But as far as where they're going with all of this, and I think you're absolutely right, Mel, is that mental health and SEL is really just an entryway into medicalizing the whole entire school and school experience. What they really want to do is implement the CDC's WISC model. WISC is WSCC, which is whole school, whole community, whole child, in which they're going to be able to offer all sorts of services to kids on campus or to refer them off campus. Including sexual and reproductive health, including dentistry work. I mean, literally, they plan to bring everything into the school to have really be like a socialist state for the kids, and with the eventual goal of taking the ability for parents to say, hey, I have to okay that service for my child and put that in the child's hands. So kids can then go to school and decide they want a vaccine, and they don't have to tell their parents, or to get puberty blockers, and they don't have to tell their parents, or any of that stuff. And this is really a slippery slope because parents are meant to protect their children from things that maybe they're too young or too naive to understand. And so this is really what they want to do with schools, and this is where they're going. Oh, no. And community schools is honestly just another nice name for the WISC model that I just talked about. Yeah. And actually where I think it ties into the bigger picture, I was talking to a friend the other day. We were talking about the resilience development goals that I discovered, which is the next iteration of the sustainable development goals. They're goals for 2030 to 2050. And then you look at how that's tied into the FEMA National Resilience Guidance that they just released. And now that they're planning to put these community centers that are going to serve as almost like emergency hubs when there is an emergency happening, which I think is probably a good idea, right? Like if you look at it on its surface. But what they're planning to do with it when it's not in use for an emergency is how I think they're going to sneak these community schools and the ability to build these facilities with all of these medical services attached to them in communities that are like, we don't want this whole community school thing, but they're going to already have them at the ready so that when they're able to privatize school by passing all these voucher and ESA bills and completely wipe out public education, they can own those buildings and then rent them out to be facilities for education. Oh, definitely. And I think they're going to in the next step where they're gonna say, oh, we need peace education, and that's a part of comprehensive sexuality education.
Exactly.
So viewers want to know where it's going next. But really, the difference is, we used to go to school and we'd have like one, like maybe a sex ed class where they said, okay, this is your equipment.
Right. Right, exactly.
This
is how you protect yourself from having
protect yourself.
Right.
Exactly. Then you have, you should probably wait to have a baby, until you're adult, maybe till you're married. It was very vanilla, very broad.
Yeah.
What they're teaching now to kids through comprehensive sexuality education, they're teaching kids to pleasure themselves as young as 5. And this is all because they want them to be in touch with their sexuality. It's really comes from the whole money-making fiasco of Planned Parenthood, right? I mean, if they can sexualize these kids early, kids who are sexualized early tend to get into sexual relationships early, tend to get pregnant early, but really it destroys their lives. And so we see this happening even through the library book situation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but really, it's a wider and broader thing, and I'm glad you brought up the religious aspect, right? That really this is a subversion of children's religious and familial beliefs. And what I horrifically discovered as I went further and further down the social emotional learning rabbit hole was that Fetzer Institute, where Castle, that organization we talked about earlier, and the whole concept of social emotional learning was born. I went into their archive documents, and it said that everything that they do is to bring about the age of the Archangel Michael. And I just about fell out of my chair. But before that, I was also reading Robert Mueller, which is the former Assistant Secretary General, and he talked about global spirituality. And really, this is what it is. They're trying to bring children, and I think the people behind the sexuality education actually believe in this hermetic law of gender, right? That people are born with 2, a male and a female spirit inside their body, right? And your body is just a container for your mind that's trapped in this body.
Right.
And it doesn't really matter how you identify then, right? I mean, this really kind of goes along with that 2-spirit thing too we hear about, right, from indigenous cultures. And so this is so much about spirituality. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing. I think they see the LGBTQIA movement, they see Black Lives Matter, they just see those as like political movements. But undergirding all that is this spiritual dimension where they really want people to come to this global consciousness, this global spirituality, that all is one, that we're all interconnected and interdependent. And that really is the basis for all of these terrible political theories like communism and socialism that we're seeing being promoted today. I mean, really what they want to do is take away national sovereignty so they can have global oneness, right? Where we distribute wealth and resources. But that's really what the purpose of all of that is.
Yeah.
I mean, really, the long march to the institutions. I mean, I think you probably couldn't find a teacher's college out there that isn't infiltrated with this stuff.
Right.
But I think kind of like how some kids who are really close with their families and their familial beliefs, they don't fall prey to this ideology, even when they're taught it at school. I think there are probably some teachers in those programs who have a very strong identity in what they believe and aren't swayed. They just kind of do what they have to do to get through their teacher training. And then I still know a lot of teachers who close the door and don't teach certain things the way that they're told to teach them. So I don't think, I don't think we should look at every teacher as a threat, but I think you're right to say that we need to know kind of where a teacher comes from, what their stances are in certain things. And I think more importantly, we need to teach our kids how to identify that when they're in the classroom, how to know when they're being gaslighted, how to know when they're being taught to have this collective mindset. And that really starts at the dinner table. I tell people that all the time at the end of my presentations is like, the way you inoculate your kids against this stuff is you make sure that your family unit's tight. And they feel more of a sense of belonging with you than they do with the teachers or their friends at school. Financial and lawfare component, because the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was passed in 2015, basically mandates that we teach social emotional learning in schools. That really what happens is they had one non-academic factor have to be included in the reporting that states do back to the federal government when they receive federal money. And the lovely people at Castle had all their consultants be already sent, they're already ready to go by the time that law passed. And they said, oh, look, we have this really nice problem. You just implement this in your school and it'll, check that box like that. And that's what really happened. And now with the infusion of all this ARPA money, which is the American Rescue Plan and CARES Act funds, all of the stuff we saw through the recovery and resilience of all of the states, the way they're defining recovery and resilience is to have to implement these programs and do more mental health and do more of these things that we've been warning about.
Right.
Oh, definitely. It's funny you bring up the meditation room. I actually had a chance to visit there. I spoke at the UN last year. I was hired by some pro-family organizations that had kind of come together to do an actual presentation at the UN. And I talked about social emotional learning and how basically if we are able to eventually have AI teach our kids this stuff, right? The scary part of that is that these feedback loops that teachers now provide where we're filling in holes in education. Well, what happens when that AI starts teaching our kids empathy with this collective lens? We're basically going to be socially engineering humans. But I think your point about the Lucis Trust is a huge one because they still publish all of UNESCO's documents. Oh, yeah. And it's interesting, you talk about Alice Bailey and Blavatsky. Many people don't understand where UNESCO came from. And it actually stemmed from a group called the New Education Fellowship. Mm-hmm. And that was started by a Theosophist and a Quaker. And they had this huge progressive education group. And this is literally, they actually say it on their Wikipedia. If you notice, they say that they were the midwives at the birth of UNESCO. And then one of the people who was a part of that, Kurt Lewin, went and started the National Training Laboratories. And this is where our regional educational laboratory folks are trained in the sensitivity training that goes on during SEL.
Wow.
And went out. And so they started that with the Office of Naval Research. So I think a lot of people don't understand, like UNESCO, even at its founding, was spiritual. Yeah. And in the New Education Fellowship documents, they talk about children finding the deity within. Right. That is the whole new purpose of education. And really, that's what they're trying to do today, but it's all masked by other language. As far as the cabal running the world, Mel, one of the hugest things I've exposed lately is that there is this group called the Evolutionary Leaders. They have 21 synergy circles. All their stuff is pinned in theosophy and what spun out of it, which was the religion, New Thought. And they've infiltrated all the sectors. So education, right. Business. They even have a deep and rapid transformation convergence group at the UN, and were the people behind the outcome document that just came out from the Summit of the Future just recently. Wow. So, there is a cabal of groups working together to push this one world religion and this one world government. Oh, definitely. And I think a lot of people don't understand that FERPA was gutted. And basically any third-party vendor that your school deals with, ed tech or otherwise, have access to your kids' data. And they say it's hidden by it's like a number, but I know a teacher, Jennifer McWilliams, she's another person who talks a lot about SEL. She knows for sure that they can backtrack that to who that student is. And so, yes, they are building profiles on your child. And that's honestly the thing that just, I think, floored me when I started studying SEL, because I was like, wait, they're collecting data and storing it in the statewide longitudinal data systems about kids' social emotional skills. And really where this comes in is the college and career readiness aspect of the Every Student Succeeds Act, because now we've linked students to college and career readiness. Well, look at the colleges and look at the businesses out there with their, black right. squares and rainbow flags. They're preparing them to have this collectivist mindset so they can be hired based on ESG principles. Right. Right. So really what they're doing is they're measuring all the time, like you said, Mel, how far away are they from adopting this collectivist mindset? And what is those feedback loops we need to give back to them so that they will adopt this mindset? And so I think we are playing Russian roulette with our kids if you send them to school. And I think you have to either arm your kid really, really well with the tools to do battle, or you need to homeschool them, because really what they have planned for how they want these kids to be, right. to enter the workforce, to be productive members of society the way that they feel that they want them to be. Right. It's scary how they are literally going to use this as a social credit system for kids. No, and I think, you talk about universal learning a second ago. I think that the point that I don't want to miss on this show is for your viewers who don't have kids, they don't just want universal learning, they want lifelong learning. So
Right.
it's coming for you too, because really what one of the other people that I've recently exposed are these people behind the inner development goals. And it's like the sustainable development goals, but your inner capacity to want to have to
Oh,
do
wow.
what you have to do to accomplish those. So this is going to be implemented in business. And we already have people like IKEA and Spotify and others implementing these types of programs, which is just SEL for adults in their businesses.
Right.
And don't you think they're gonna do that as like part of professional development? And now if you want to do well on your review at work,
You
now
go
you got
take
to
this
adopt these
course.
mindsets.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that for people to ignore this is to ignore it at their peril, because when they say cradle to grave, they really mean it.
Yeah.
No, and it doesn't. And what that causes, what you're saying, where you have to be one person at home and another
Right.
person at work. I mean, that's disassociation. You talk to any psychologist and they're going to tell you that that's not healthy.
Right.
And I think the thing that they start with these very young kids, disassociating them from their families.
I know.
I mean, again, we wonder why we have the mental health crisis. I think it's causing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say other than like we just have to we don't need we don't have enough people in power actually challenging this
Right.
and understanding it. And we have unfortunately SEL and programs like that are bipartisanly supported because
Yeah.
they think like this whole thing is like, oh, we have a problem, we got to fix it with the state. No, I think we need to start changing the conversation. Right. Well, it works similar to the federal plan too that I exposed. I would encourage your audience to go check out my pin tweet and my profile and
Oh,
on
it's great.
X.
Yeah.
But what they're going to do is they're going to say, what are the conditions for resilience? And then they're going to say, oh yeah, smart cities and all the socialist communist things that they want to implement through Agenda 2030.
Right.
And what it's going to actually become, I think, the WEF has put out an article that says we should add an R to ESG. They're going to make them report on their resilience and then make it an insurance risk. Oh, thank you. You can find me on X at I am Lisa Logan. I encourage you to visit my YouTube channel, Parents and Patriots, and watch the videos there. And you can also find my articles on Substack
Great.
under my education manifesto.